Hey, so this psych skill is cognitive distortions. As we prepare to do a thought record, which is kind of will be the final worksheet that we're going to be doing in this course, and it's a big project. I'll show you. I'll show you what a thought record is. So this is a thought record. It'll probably be in two parts. What we'll do the thought record. It is kind of a snapshot of how we can apply healed mind therapy into a worksheet and have a comprehensive experience. Some of the most important things is to be able to identify the distortions that we have in our automatic thoughts. So distortions are what causes us suffering. So every loving thought is true. Everything else is a call for help and healing. So when we have a distortion, this is something that's not true that will cause us suffering, and it's also a call for help and healing. So we're going to go over some cognitive distortions that you're going to see, and and then we're going to be able to use that when we do the thought record. So cognitive distortions are not a complete representation of the facts, but they're convincing because they're often based on the truth and sometimes partially are true. It is an automatic thought, rule or belief that is misrepresented in an unbalanced way. So the first thing I'm going to introduce you to is all or nothing thinking. So this is black and white thinking. I got little notes here. This is how we'll describe the world, our experiences of ourselves in black and white. So this would also be good and bad. One of the cognitive distortions that we were introduced to as young children, for most people, especially people in they're born in the 80s, 90s, 70s, 60s, 50s, and back, is this idea of good girl, bad girl. In the late 90s, early 2000s, mid 2000s, a lot of people have moved away from this. So good girl, good boy, bad boy. The one implies the other. So when we say, when you do the thing that I like, you're a good boy, it has the implication that when you don't do the thing I like, then you're a bad boy. So having this kind of thinking conditioned into us of like, you're either this or you're this, will create cognitive distortions that are going to cause us harm. So labeling anything as good or bad causes harm because one implies the other, which I just said. Often we will perceive ourselves as the worst in these kind of situations. Um, this is one of the ways we justify a lack of compassion. So if I do something bad, then this is evidence that I'm just a bad person. Anger can cause the opposite experience where we feel we are better than others when we see others as worse than us. So if you attack somebody, that's one way for you to make yourself feel better because you're saying what they're doing is bad. So then you must be good. It creates rules that are either followed or never followed. So there's no in between. So all Black people are slaves. If you lie, you're always a liar. Therefore, if you're not perfect, you're a failure. So this would be somebody who might struggle with getting a grade on their test, getting a 90%. Well, if I didn't get 100, then that means I'm not enough. So it has to be one way or the other. There's no room for gray. There's no room for like, oh, this was my best. It's very much you're right or you're wrong, you're good or you're bad. Okay. An example of this would be a farmer planted a crop, and then when it came to harvest, 20% was damaged. This outcome was unacceptable, so he refused to harvest the other 80%, and he starved in the winter. Okay, so unless it's perfect, it's not enough. This is also an example of when we're in resistance to, what is our best, or, what is in the moment, right? So the cost of this is pursuing perfection. This is where perfectionist thinking comes from, this kind of all or nothing thinking, is it decreases our performance in the long run instead of increasing it, often because we have more anxiety. When you have more anxiety and you are really concerned about the outcome, you're actually going to not do as well and not perform as well as when you're in a flow state. So flow state is being in non-resistance and allowing things to just flow. It's kind of like following your heart. There's an ease to it of not having walls and barriers to doing what you want to do and what feels most loving to you. And that's what's going to give you the best possible outcome. So perfectionist thinking does cause suffering. And that's definitely something in healed mind therapy we want to be looking at because there's no such thing as perfect, except for the fact that innately you are. And we don't need to be a certain way for us to be lovable. And the implication with perfectionism is I need to be this in order to be enough. And that's just not true. Okay. And I think I'm going to leave that one there. And then another example of a cognitive distortion is overgeneralizing. So I fail a math test, I will always fail at math. So this is like kind of projecting as well. So your partner or that's really lovely spelling, Amanda. Your partner or your love interest ended the relationship, or you get bullied at school, I will always be rejected. So these having one experience and then anticipating that it's always going to be like this. This distortion may cause more long-term damage than the situation that caused it. So it becomes trauma, right? We have one person that abuses us or that we don't trust. Now we think we can trust nobody. And it's a coping mechanism. We're using it to try to keep ourselves safe, but ultimately it's causing suffering. So broad generalizations are based on limited amount of experiences. We make predictions about ourselves and other people or situations that might not be warranted by the data. And when I say data, I mean like the amount of experiences you have. You haven't had enough experience to be able to generalize that this is always the truth. Now, if you have the lens, one of the things that you can always test is, are all loving thoughts true, and everything else a call for help and healing. Something like that, you can see that everywhere. You can see every time that you've ever done anything less than loving that you were struggling. So there's plenty of data for that. But this idea that people are bad, or that you are never safe, or that you deserve attack, other people deserve attack, or we should be afraid based on a time when you struggled or a time when someone else struggled, that would be an overgeneralization that's going to cause a lot of suffering. So the example here would be a new farmer planted a crop for the first time, but he had a drought and a scant return. The farmer assumes that every year his crops will fail, and he gives up farming. So I can't farm. It's not lucrative. It's not in my best interest, but he didn't have enough experience in order to do that. So overgeneralizing is technically a statistical error. We make conclusions about a whole population based on a limited sample. And we need years of crop for many different people before concluding it's not worth trying to farm, or that everyone's going to reject me. One of the traumas that might happen too is this is also seen in mirroring. Our own psychology will see outside of ourselves, but if we had a parent that judged us for our looks, for example, we will project that other people will judge us for our looks like they did. And that's, again, another generalization, but also shows that mirror of, maybe you judge and then you expect other people to judge. But it's not the case, right? That's overgeneralizing. I think we're gonna do two more. So mental filter. So mental filter is paying attention only to certain types of evidence that support our beliefs, and filtering out any disconfirming evidence that may challenge our beliefs. So this is the lens, right? This is the lens. If you say I'm unlovable, and then everything you can twist and turn. If it's neutral, if it's expression of love, it's a call for love. Somehow this is evidence that you're not enough. This is the primary way that I believe that this filter is used. It's similar to confirmation bias, which is a human trait that suggests people have a tendency to confirm their beliefs through emphasizing supporting evidence. There's no other way of looking at the situation. So if they don't text you back, they must not care, right? That's your mental filter. They don't care about me. Now, interesting, we can actually use mental filter the other way too. When you get to a conclusion of so for example, negative assumptions are always false is a mental filter that we can actually use as a tool to help move us closer to the truth and decrease our suffering. So mental filter is in and of itself neutral. It's how it's used. So if we know at the core there's only hurt people or people expressing love, and that no one ever deserves attack, if you hold the mental filter that anything that you're seeing somehow that's their best, right? And the more you test that on the individual basis in your own life and in other people's lives, where you're able to kind of get the behind the scenes information, you can get enough data to reliably say negative assumptions are always false. People are generally good. So you can use the mental filter in order to see the best in everybody, or to assume the best, or to be able to even default to, wow, that person must be really hurting. That's not about me. That person must be really hurting. That's not about me. Or that's neutral. Or that's an expression of love. So be able to say that's an expression of love, a call for love, or it's neutral and it's not personal. That can be your mental filter. And that's going to bring incredible peace in your life. And it's in alignment with the truth. So mental filter is not necessarily used as a distortion that's going to cause suffering. We can actually use it for the truth as well. So ways to challenge a mental filter is you can write down reasons why people do love you, or even identifying things that so we want to disconfirm core beliefs. One of the ways that I do disconfirm core beliefs is I'll ask people, so if they think there's bad people in the world that they need to protect themselves, I'll say, have you ever done anything ever bad? And then we'll look at the psychology of that, and you'll always see somehow that they were hurting, that was their best in the moment. And when you can kind of when you open up to the idea that you're doing your best, and that how you where your heart was when you did that action, or when you yelled at that person, or how you were feeling in that moment, you can start to see that other people are also doing their best. So that's one way to challenge it. And then the best friend technique is a fantastic technique. This is going to be used in our thought record, which is saying, okay, how would your best friend deal with this? Or how would someone who's really loving, what would they say to you in that moment? And it forces us to consider arguments someone else would have on our behalf, who remember that we're lovable. So sometimes we can't believe that we're lovable, but then we can project outside of ourselves and say, okay, if your friend was experiencing the same thing, was thinking the same thing, what advice would you give them? What's the best friend's position on this situation? And you can actually find that you can remove the cognitive distortion a little bit easier when we put ourselves in the position of the other. Okay, so the metaphor for this one, or the example, would be a rookie farmer's first harvest was scant, but he had so much success. Love my spelling, I'm so adorable. Working on his uncle's farm, that he concludes, I'm a terrible farmer, and gives up farming. He filtered out the evidence, that weather and other things outside of his control, and just said, well, this is just, I'm a horrible farmer. So he didn't look at the fact that there was other reasons. Just like bad people, there's other reasons people do things, that they're not actually bad people, but there's hurting people. And when we see it from another filter, or we correct our filter, that's how we can achieve peace, and get closer to truth. All right, this is the last one we're going to do in detail here. So do disqualifying the positive. So this is another cognitive distortion that we use. So we're aware of pauses, but we devalue or minimize their importance. This often happens when you're struggling with your self-love and you think that you're not enough. This, again, a confirmation bias, that we will filter out the things that, it's in a way, it's a form of mental filter. But we're just going to be more specific. So this would be saying, yes, that doesn't count because. An example of this would be a brilliant student saying math is easy and assuming everyone feels that way. It's no big deal. Disqualifying the positive, suggesting it's not important. So when we, the things that we are good at, we say, okay, well, that doesn't mean anything. A lot of people are good at that kind of thing. That's not what gives me value. And then the things that we'll attribute value to, things that maybe we struggle with having, or that aren't natural to us, or that we haven't been able to create in our lives. Or even like, if you think you're only valuable if you have two legs and you only have one, that's a value that you've placed on something that is completely outside of your control. So a farmer planted a crop that failed and concluded, I'm not good enough to be a farmer. When reminded of his success on his uncle's farm, he said, yes, that doesn't count, right? So that minimizing that. So we can challenge this. We often overestimate how similar everyone is to us, but that's because we project our our psychology on other people, right? Since we assume everyone is like us, so it's easy to dismiss our unique gifts and abilities. So generate a gratitude journal. So gratitude journals we want to be careful with, and I think I mentioned that on um, the other what another worksheet on journaling. We want to be careful with gratitude journals because they can sometimes mislead you to value the valueless. But you want another way you can do this is mental subtraction, which imagine your life without the positive, but not attributing that your value comes from it, but that you can see things differently. So really looking at your perception. Your perception is what's causing your suffering, and then changing it and seeing that you're enough. The core of what we need to be shifting to is that you're always enough, and not disqualifying anything. You're always qualified. Okay. We're just gonna summarize. I have a little summary sheet here, and I'm gonna attach this for you guys. So again, it goes over the all or nothing, overgeneralizing, mental filter, disqualifying the positive. So a couple of other ones is jumping to conclusions. So we do this by mind reading. Okay, we imagine what others are thinking. This happens all the time. Oh, they're judging me. Oh, they're not going to like me. And fortune telling, predicting the future. Oh, they're going to leave me. They're going to cheat on me. Okay, I'm going to fail. Right, and then we often will create the scenario that we're most afraid of as well, through our anxiety, through pressure that we put on other people because we're calling for love. Magnification is catastrophe. That said, sorry, before I go on, we are not responsible for others' thoughts, emotions, and actions. And we cannot make anybody do, think, or feel anything. And we are, though, however, responsible for our suffering and our perception. So magnification or catastrophizing and minimalization, so blowing things out of proportion or inappropriately shrinking something to make it seem less important. So catastrophizing. Okay, we'll say we have a teenager that fails a math test and being, oh my gosh, this is so horrible. You're going to have to go to summer school and you need to study every night for 4 hours and that'd be, you're gonna fail, you're gonna be a failure in life. So that would be catastrophizing. Also shrinking. So say you had a teenager that completely failed a grade, and then not even acknowledging that. Now with Healed Mind Therapy, we would be giving love, compassion, gentle correction. In this little page there, I'm sure that they're implying that we should be, being a little bit more reactive. But the truth is if you had a teenager that failed, there's only so much you can do. Really, their actions are outside your control. But we wouldn't just disregard it. We would still say, hey, I love you, and I understand somehow this was your best. Can you help me understand why this was your best, and how and do you want to make this better? And then opening that dialogue to create the change. But that conversation, if you didn't have that, that would be minimizing something that really is a crucial conversation, or a conversation that's most loving to have. And that usually is evidence of fear or call for love if you were shrinking the importance of that conversation or not having it. Emotional reasoning is because we feel a certain way, it must be true. So when we feel guilty, it must mean that we did something wrong. I feel embarrassed, so I must be an idiot. So that's, it's just not real, right? So you can feel something. That doesn't mean that your thoughts are in alignment with the truth. And any thoughts that are bringing you suffering really aren't. Okay. Should, have to, ought to's. So this has been something that we've covered thoroughly. When we apply shoulds, so using critical words can make us feel guilty, like we've already failed. It's a distortion. It's not real. There's nothing you have to do. Nothing you have to do. There's nothing you ought to do. There's nothing you should do. What do you want to do? What feels most loving to you is the path out of that. And if we apply shoulds to other people, it'll lead to frustration. So if I say, I should always be on time, I have to be on time. When someone else is struggling to be on time, or it's not loving for them to be on time, I would judge them. Not only that, but I would self-harm to make sure I'm on time because I have to, right? Even if it's not most loving for me. So being able to release the have to, ought to, and shoulds and shift to what do I want to do, what feels most loving. And then labeling, to ourselves and others, this also causes harm. So I'm a loser, I'm completely useless, they're such an idiot. If you, whatever labels you use for yourself, you're going to use for other people, whatever you use for other people. And it's not necessarily the same label, but if you attack other people for what is their best, you will absolutely attack yourself for what is your best. And you'll have anxiety about not doing or looking the way that you have attacked other people. So if you say, you're ugly, you will have a lot of anxiety about making sure that you don't look ugly. Whereas, if you don't judge other people and don't label other people, you're going to feel so much less pressure in your life, and so much more peace. So personalization, this is my fault or this is your fault. So one of the things we learned in Heal My Therapy, at the end of the day, there's nobody to blame. And this distortion is blaming yourself and saying, okay, if they left me, it's my fault. If they cheated, it's my fault. Okay. And not to end and taking responsibility for things that are not in your control, like others' thoughts, emotions, and actions. Conversely, blaming other people for something that you are responsible for. So I'm sad. You made me sad. You made me think that I'm not lovable. They may have done something that triggered in you a response where you had that perception, but ultimately your perception caused you to think you're not lovable, not the other person. So personalization is another form of a cognitive distortion. These are all things that we covered in Heal Mind Therapy, but this is just different language. This is actually CBT language for it. So there's some slight variation with Healed Mind Therapy, but it's still important for us to cover because it's going to be very applicable to when we start the thought records. And yes, I think, there we go. We're going to stop sharing that. And that's all for today. And so I'm going to send the cognitive distortions at the bottom here. I want you to just look in your life. Where are the cognitive distortions? The more you kind of think about this, the more you can start seeing it, the more it'll be reinforced in your life to help you to notice it and then shift it. So you can also do this when you're watching TV or watching movies or just with family and friends in your life, and notice cognitive distortions around you.